Welcome back to Forza Horizon 5, y'all, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you why the new Deberti F250 has quickly become one of my favorite vehicles in A-Class online racing, particularly for cross-country. And yes, there will be a tune available, and if you would like to try out the exact tune I'm using in this video, just look it up by my gamer tag, Tomcat9700, and it will be, again, for A-Class, although do keep in mind that this tune is still a work in progress, and I may release future variations of it as time goes on. I also figured why not throw a hilariously fun livery on the side so that not only are people getting passed by a giant F250, they're also getting passed by a giant F250 that has a Powerpuff Girls livery on it. That is literally one of the best things I feel like you could do in Horizon Online Racing. And plus, if all of your paint jobs are solely like serious race liveries only, I feel like it's fun to have a couple of other liveries that are like solely for the purpose of having it for the fun of it. So, with all of that out of the way, onto the mechanicals and why I chose the setup I chose for this particular F250, and what makes it competitive. Well, engine-wise, I'm running the 7.2-liter Racing V8, not the one that comes factory with twin turbos, not the one that's like 1,750 horsepower. The engine setup in this truck is making around 1,356 horsepower and 1,021 foot-pounds of torque. Now, it does have a set of turbos on it, which is why obviously you're hearing the spool sound and the backfiring sounds in the air. But one of the things that I really like about this setup is that it feels very quick, especially for the class. Like, not only does it feel quick in the sense of comparing it to other vehicles, but it feels quick in the sense of just all the vehicles in A-Class sub the Bone Shaker, because, you know, literally when I went online to try this thing out, the first lobby I jumped into, well, I was like, oh, would you look at that? I'm jumping into an A-Class online lobby, and there's our old friend, the Bone Shaker. Bone Shaker, I'm gonna go on a side rant, but Bone Shaker is so just, I'm so tired of seeing them. It's such like an old... Do people that use Bone Shaker exclusively ever get tired of just using Bone Shaker? I'm genuinely curious, because yes, I know it's overpowered and blah, 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 but like, even if it's that much better, wouldn't you just get bored of using the exact same car over and over again? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. But anyways, back to the setup of this truck once again. As you can probably tell from the footage, it's a bit slide focused. Now, I do have it set up so that you can both rotate it in on throttle and rotate it into a corner under braking. It's actually really good trail braking wise. Now, what I also like about this truck is it responds really, really well to trail braking on the way into the corner, getting the back end rotated a little bit, and then just feeding the power in gradually. And then the four-wheel drive system will obviously help both pull you from the front and push you from the back. And this particular amount of power is really good for making it both really fun and competitive in A-Class. Now, obviously, I'm no like pro-level player. I'm not going to go online with this thing and destroy, like, you know, a pro in a Bone Shaker. But at the same time, if you want a setup that absolutely rips and is just all around fun to drive, this thing is where it's at. And it also makes you, at least for me, it makes you make some interesting decisions as a driver, because if you just throw this thing into corners with intense amounts of speed, like genuinely massive amounts of speed like you would in a smaller car, you're probably going to end up sliding off course or sliding into a tree or something like that. So it actually does kind of force you to think about the weight and the mass of the vehicle. But what's interesting about that, and what you'll see in some of the footage from these two upcoming races, is that not a lot of people think about that. Like, for example, the person in that Peugeot, they just kind of four-wheel slid themselves into the wall because they went in with way too much momentum. But this truck, because it's so big and so high, actually forces you to think about the dynamics of the weight balance and the weight distribution. And when you brake, you see all the weight shift forward. When you throw it into a corner, you see all the weight shift to the left or shift to the right. You see the suspension get loaded up when you go under braking, under power, various stages of weight transfer in the corners. And when you're thinking about that a lot, at least for me, it makes me drive better, and it also makes me drive more consistently, and it helps back me off just that little extra bit so that I'm not, like, plowing off through the barriers. You literally saw, as I looked behind, I wanted to see where my opponent was. My opponent had plowed off into the woods because I'm assuming that they saw a massive truck with a Powerpuff Girls livery on it ahead of them, and just, you know, they couldn't contain their absolute rage and just had to throw it into the corner as fast as humanly possible. But as we can clearly see, that only really leads to you being in the trees. And that actually brings me to another point about driving this thing in online races, is that when you're driving something this big, a lot of people and a lot of other, like, at least a lot of people in smaller cars, it's so interesting because it both helps combat ramming and it also makes other drivers behave in very interesting ways around you. And what I mean by behave in interesting and different ways around you is that I find that players tend to get more aggressive when you're in a larger vehicle, and in a lot of cases, it actually forces them to make mistakes while you just continue to drive your own consistent line. And I think it's because these larger vehicles, and the F250 in particular, they're so imposing that people almost feel like they're like obligated to beat you. They must beat you because they're in a much smaller car, and then when they look back in their mirror and you're still there just chilling, it's almost like they're like, oh, I gotta turn it up even more, and when they turn it up even more, they end up plowing off the track. Now, when people try to ram you in this thing, it's actually quite funny because, yeah, you'll get shoved just a little bit, but for the most part, people kind of bounce off of you. And Forza Horizon 5 has a particularly, I mean, it's kind of always been this way in the Forza series, but Horizon 5 in particular. I find that after they implemented the anti-ramming system where it will ghost people, what people will do is instead of ramming you at high speed, they'll wait until you're near a checkpoint, and then they'll try to force you just to the outside of the line, and then just bump you off so that you go outside the checkpoint, and then, you know, you miss the checkpoint and the game respawns you, and then they automatically get placed a lot farther ahead. Now, in something like this, tactics like that, cheeky tactics like that, are a lot less effective. Now, I tried to take the inside line there. I ended up bumping the Peugeot just a little bit, and so what I did was I backed off, I gave them some space to acknowledge the fact that I bumped them, and then I got back on pace again. And I kind of like to do that just in case I accidentally bump somebody else's car, because I don't, you know, I have no interest in actually intentionally bumping somebody off the line. If I accidentally bump somebody's car, I'll back up, I'll give them some space, and then I'll resume my pace again. Now, you see the person in front of me, they're just kind of like, they're being so aggressive on both, like, entry and trying to be aggressive on exit, whereas the driving style you take with this thing is like, yes, it's intense, but it's also very chill. And you see there, they tried to force me into the wall. And thankfully, it didn't give me a slowdown penalty, like a wall ride slowdown penalty, but I have picked up wall ride penalties before solely because someone tried to force me into a wall and force me to get a penalty. That's another really dirty tactic that I see people using sometimes, and I really don't know why people do that. I mean, it's like, if you want to actually race, just run the race, you know, without trying to force people off the track, push people into walls, this, that, and the other thing. It's just so much more fun when people actually just, I don't know, race in a racing game rather than using it as a push people off the track and push people into walls simulator. But at the same time, I feel like, in terms of that subject anyway, those are tactics that people are always going to try to use in a game like this. And, you know, if you have the patience to just wait for people to try to pull dirty tactics like that, and then, you know, you wait for them to try to pull them, and then you just run right on by them, and you're like, have a fun race. Yeah, I turned my truck completely sideways right there at the end, just to see if, like, it actually helped to mess with the person that was messing with me earlier. Now, in this race, this was a different lobby, and this will show kind of the comparison between, yes, this thing is quick, but when it gets in a lobby with a bone shaker, as when most things get in a lobby with a bone shaker, it's just bone shaker things happen, and the meta kind of just takes place as it goes. Now, I'm not saying that this thing cannot beat a bone shaker, maybe with a different driver or on a different track. I did end up beating that same Bone Shaker in a race a little bit later on, but it was because the Bone Shaker crashed into a railroad bridge and they were put so far behind the pack that they just couldn't catch back up by the end of the race. So at the end of the day, is this the best possible vehicle to run in A-Class cross country? No. But is it better than most? I think so. I think it's definitely on the upper end, kind of the upper like 3/4 of what is good to run. And, you know, again, the tune is by far not perfect. It needs a lot more work. But I definitely think against most of the vehicles in A-Class, it can absolutely hold its own. And you also have a great variety of things you can do with engine setups, tuning setups, if you want to build one of these for yourselves. So I would definitely recommend it as an A-Class cross-country build, and I think it also does a good job of making trucks a viable option for, you know, effective race vehicles in Horizon 5. But with that all being said and done, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Hit that like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I will see y'all next time. Talk to y'all later.